to Havrat Shalom. Wait a minute, got to say got it. Yeah, we all know Joan is very special to our congregation and always going above and beyond. And so for the Talk to Me series, you've brought just a phenomenal number of really outstanding speakers. And I said this to you earlier this afternoon, but Rabbi Saltzman, who's now a rabbi emeritus, used to bring wonderful speakers, writers, award-winning writers, Nobel-winning, prize-winning speakers. And we always refer to them as friends of Rabbi Arnold Saltzman. So now we have friends of Joan. So Joan, thank you for doing this for us.
This is truly my friend, and it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker. So thank you, Steve. So in his early 20s, Johnny Shuchart left his middle school teaching position and changed the life insurance industry when he made it possible for parents to insure their mentally challenged children. He also spearheaded innovations in the delivery of employee benefits through payroll deduction. After selling his successful insurance business, Johnny returned to the classroom where he worked with students to develop After, a curriculum designed to help high school and middle school youth work through anxiety caused by 9/11. Johnny led student groups in Kansas City, New York, and Israel to create their own courses on dealing with terrorism. He also, the program spawned two books, Kids' Letters to Terrorists and Israeli Kids' Letters to Terrorists. Meanwhile, 5 young women in a Catholic school in Uniontown, Kansas, population like 300, made an incredible discovery in their history day that would change their lives and that of a very special woman. They discovered a magazine clipping with the headline, Irina Sendler saves 2,500 children from the Warsaw Ghetto. Their teacher thought it was some kind of mistake. Enter Johnny Shuchart, a Jewish educator and businessman who told the girls he'd raise the money and send them to Warsaw. He raised that money in 24 hours, and they all traveled to Poland for an emotional meeting that he will tell you about. And it also turned into a book and a movie. He has so much to talk about. Please join me in welcoming my friend, an inspiration, a person who gives back, walks the walk, talks the talk, and a great guy, Johnny Shuchart.
Thank you very much. I don't know where he is. He left. I'm not that guy. Okay, how do I get to be on the big screen? I'm speaking, but I'm
Don't worry about it. Just talk and they'll handle it from this end. You just talk.
All right. Well, let me tell you, Joni wanted me to tell you just a little bit about me. I've known my wife since we were 4. I have a picture of her in my phone from when we were 7. And of course, we dated all through preschool, kindergarten. It was a little weird taking her outside and necking with her in kindergarten, but I did it. And high school, college. And we've been married now for 52 years, gone steady and all that for like 60 something years. So she knows what I'm going to say before I even think about what I'm going to say. It's been a unique relationship. We have 2 children. One of them lives here and has 2 children. So I have 2 grandkids here. And I have a daughter who just had a baby 10 months ago. And she and her husband, because of a job, moved to Korea, of all places. Of course, I asked her which one, north or south, and she gave me the right answer. She said south. That was good. And so she and her baby and her husband are now in Korea. And they're going to be there probably for 3 years. He signed a contract. I did go to Michigan State and majored in education. I came out and I taught school. I taught American history backwards. And that was interesting. And I didn't think of that idea. The student did. On the second day of class, the 8th grader said, we never get to now. We always end up, in the 60s or the 50s. We never get to now. He said, why don't we start now and go backwards? I came home and told my wife what a dumb idea that was. And she said, are you kidding? That's ingenious. Kids have to learn how to think deductively as well as inductively. And I said, great, you go teach them because I have no idea how to do this. It was really difficult, but really fun. I had parents in my classroom almost every day because their kids were coming home so excited about history. And this was during the Vietnam War, and kids actually could talk at the dinner table about the war and their feelings. And in 8th grade, that was a shock to most of their parents. So it really went well. At the end of the year, my father went into the insurance business over the summer, and he asked me if I could help him over the summer, which I did. Make a long story short, I was in a gentleman's home selling him life insurance, and he had a 5-year-old son who I was playing with the whole time, a really neat kid. And he said, after I sold him, can you get insurance for little Bobby? I remember thinking this business is easy. I took an application out. I went through all the questions. I got to the question of any mental or nervous disorders. I put no. He said, wait a minute. He's retarded. And that's the word we used back then. He said, he's mentally retarded. He goes to a special school. I was in shock because this kid seemed as normal as anyone. And being a kid from the 60s, me, and being into protesting and wanting answers and all of that, I said, well, I don't understand. There's no problem. And he said, I've had 22 companies turn my child down. And I said, that doesn't make any sense. This is not health insurance, by the way. It's life insurance. And he's in great health. And he said, young man, which I wish somebody would say now. He said, young man, you're not going to get it. So I went back to the office, showed my father the application on him. He said that was great. Showed it to him on the kid, and he ripped it up. And my father said, "This is ridiculous. You've got to know that we're not going to insure retarded children." And he said, "If we send this down, the insurance company will cancel our license." Long story short, again, I went home. My wife said, "This is a great idea. I want you to quit teaching, and I want you to find a way to do this." And I had been in the insurance business for a month. And the insurance industry in America was 150 years old. And I said, how am I going to do this? She said, you'll figure it out. So she was a social worker making $500 a month. And now I'm out chasing this dream, making nothing a month. And somehow, some way, she managed the budget and we made it. And it took me 3 years, but I did get a company to write insurance on the retarded kids. Probably the best thing I've done in the insurance industry anyway. So time went by. I did a whole bunch of things for 40 years in the insurance industry. And then I always promised myself if I could afford it, I was going to go back and teach again. So in 2000, I went back and I taught 8th grade American history again, this time the right way, the normal way, not backwards. And I taught a huge unit on the Holocaust. My kids were so excited that one Monday I walked in and the entire room looked like Auschwitz. They had gotten in over the weekend and they did an incredible job, which obviously told me they're really into what we're doing. My vice principal came to me and he said, I've got a friend down in Uniontown, Kansas, where I used to teach, and he's a history teacher. And I understand his class has done something about the Holocaust. How would you like to take the day off? I'll bring them up. They'll do their little play or whatever they're doing. And basically, you won't have to teach. I said, great. Bring them up twice. 2 days would be good. They came up and they had this little 18-minute play called Life in a Jar. And it was a high school 18-minute play. It wasn't great, but it had a message. My kids were enthralled. You could have heard a pin drop. So they really got into it. Afterwards, I took the girls out to lunch and we started talking. And they said, this woman that we're talking about is alive and she's 91 years old. And her name was Irina Sendlerova. In English, we call her Sendler, Irina Sendler. And as Joan mentioned, let's back up a second. They were doing a history project for History Day, and they saw an article that talked about Irina, that she saved 2,500 children from the Warsaw Ghetto. Now, if that does not impress you, remember Oskar Schindler? Almost everyone's seen that movie. He saved 1,100 people. She saved more than twice as many, and they were about 95% children. She did save a few adults, but mostly children. And when you think about it, and I'll tell you in a minute about why, but she became, in my mind, the greatest salesperson in the history of the world because she had the 3 toughest sales any human being could ever make. And we'll talk about that in a second. Anyway, at lunch, I said, you got to go see this lady. And they said, we're saving up. And they said they had about $200. And I remember saying, she'll be dead by the time you get there. And I thought about it in a minute and I said, I'll get you the money. And in about a day, 24 hours, calling friends and myself and wife and all, we had the money to send them, their grandparents, a couple aunts and uncles. There were 10 or 12 people. to Warsaw to meet Irina Sendler. And later I'll read you a letter she wrote me, and you can see how grateful she was to be able to meet her girls. This all started from an article and a project that for History Day was to find an unsung hero. And the girls, as I said, found this, and the history teacher said, I've been teaching for 35 years. This is a misprint. I've never heard of her. It must be 25, or maybe she saved 250. Surely she didn't save 2,500. So he said, go back and find somebody else. And they thought about it and said, why would it be in print? Why would it be an article if it wasn't true? And that's the way they were thinking. So they stuck to it, unbeknownst to the teacher. They found out that there's an organization for Holocaust survivors and so forth in Miami. And they called there and they said, have you ever heard of a lady named Irina Sendler? And they said, oh yeah, she's alive, which kind of shocked them because they knew that she had to be pretty elderly. They got her address and they started writing her in Warsaw. She was in a nursing home in Warsaw, the best one that was there, as a matter of fact. And I saw it and it wasn't very good, but it was the best one. So they started writing her, and she didn't answer. This was like for 6 weeks. They would write her 1 or 2 letters a week, and she never answered. They thought maybe it was the wrong address, or maybe she had passed away. And out of the blue, all of a sudden, they got a letter, and the letter said, if all these girls, these few girls in Uniontown, Kansas, population 300, Catholic girls, are interested in my story, maybe I should tell you about it. And so she started writing back and answering their questions back and forth. And they ended up with this play, which I'll explain in a minute, called Life in a Jar. Irina, when she was growing up, lived about 15 miles from Warsaw in a little town. Her father was a doctor, and the town had a fair number of Jewish people. And her father was a type of person where a lot of the people couldn't afford his services, so he did it in exchange for chickens and food and whatever. And she learned from that, number one, Jewish people are not the devil. And number two, she learned charity. She learned all those things from her dad. And so as she grew up, she became a social worker. And during the war, the Warsaw Ghetto, the Germans wanted everybody to settle down. There were, as you probably know, 500,000 people in an area, a ghetto, that maybe could hold 100,000. And so the Germans wanted social workers to go in and calm everybody down and do what they could do. So Irina, and I don't know why she didn't get in trouble for this, actually wore a Mogen David on her arm in sympathy and empathy for the Jewish people. So let me start telling you about why she's the greatest salesperson in the world. She would see a family leaning up against a wall, let's say a husband and wife and a 5-year-old daughter. And she would walk up to them, and of course they didn't know her and she didn't know them. And she would look them in the eye and say, listen, your child is not going to make it out of here alive. I want to try to take your kid and smuggle them through past the guards. Now remember, I may not get past the guards, and your child may be shot and killed immediately. But I'm going to try to somehow get your daughter past the guards and into safety. Now, I don't know about you, but the last thing in the world I would do was to give up my most prized possession, my daughter, to a stranger, who also told me she may not make it past the guard. She did this 2,500 times. She convinced parents. She told me when I got to meet her, that her biggest problem wasn't the parents, it was grandparents, because the grandparents would tell the parents, it can't get any worse than this. Just hold on. Don't give your daughter away. That's ridiculous. Things will get better. And so her biggest fight was with grandparents. So then she usually had to go and talk to the grandparents. And a lot of times they said, no, no, no. But the parents had some inkling that maybe this was the right thing to do. So what a salesperson to talk somebody into giving up their child. And she was successful. The second thing that was unbelievable, maybe even more difficult than a child. Poland is arguably the most anti-Semitic country in the world, then and now. 98% of the population are Catholics. Anti-Semitism runs rampant. She would go up to a truck driver, Roman Catholic, Polish truck driver, anti-Semitic, and convince him to carve out underneath one of his seats an area so they could stick a child up there and he could drive to the gate and hopefully not get caught. Now, he didn't get paid He risked his life because if he was caught, he'd be shot immediately, by the guards. How did she do that? 2,500 times she convinced people to help her who had no business helping her. That's only two of the three most incredible things she did. Once she got a child out of the ghettos, they weren't safe. As you probably know, if the Gestapo found out that a Polish citizen knew something, saw a child suspiciously going somewhere at night and so forth, and didn't turn that child in to the Gestapo, that person would be killed immediately. So the next thing she had to do was sneak the child past the public at night usually. And she had a bunch of homes that she would keep kids at until she could find a permanent place to put them. And she had like 4 homes on one side of the street, 4 on another. I got to see the street, and at the end of the street was the biggest, ugliest yellow building you've ever seen. And I said, "What is that?" And the person that was helping us said, "Oh, that was the Gestapo headquarters." Nobody would have thought anybody would have the guts to hide children within sight of the Gestapo. But she figured they would never look that close to home, and she was right. So she would keep these children in these homes until she could find a permanent place to put them. So the third biggest sale, a lot of the kids she was able to get into convents, but a lot of the kids she went to farmers. And the farmers maybe had 6, 8 children because they needed them to help on the farm. They had lots of kids. So she would go to the farmer, Roman Catholic, anti-Semitic, most likely farmer, and say, "Look, I need you to take in this 5-year-old girl, change her name to a Christian name, teach her all about Catholicism. And oh, by the way, if you're caught, the Gestapo will kill you and your entire family. And no, we don't have any money to pay you." 2,500 times she convinced people to risk their lives for nothing. I don't know anybody who's a better salesperson than that. One of the most remarkable parts about what she did is how she smuggled kids out. One 6-week-old baby was smuggled out in a carpenter's toolbox. Lots of kids were smuggled out in trucks, the trucks that were allowed to come in and out of the ghetto. They trained a German Shepherd to sit next to the driver on occasion, and the German Shepherd would be hit on his paw by the driver. He'd hit his paw, and he would start barking crazy. And so the noise was so bad, etc. The guard would say, "Get out of here, get out of here." So the truck was able to move past the gate. She was never caught, by the way, ever, until, remember that street I told you about with children on both sides in the houses? There was a little old lady, lived on, like the house down or so from these. And all of a sudden she said, "This is kind of weird. I keep seeing all these children going in and out of these houses all times of day and night." So she called the Gestapo. The Gestapo came, arrested Irina, sent her to jail. They interrogated her, tortured her, broke her legs so bad she never walked again, and she was sentenced to die. She had joined an organization, an underground organization called Zagota, and people from Zagota went to the prison the night before she was to be killed and convinced and bribed, really, the guard, who said, "What's one more Jew?" So he took the money and he let her escape. For the next 2 years or so, she was in hiding from the Germans. She changed her name to Yolenta. And after the war, obviously, she came back. Let me tell you what else she did that's so remarkable. I told you the kids' play was called Life in a Jar. And here's how they came up with that. Irina went to a good friend and said, "Don't come outside. I want to do something in your backyard." And she did this, by the way, every Sunday. And she went out, and there was a huge oak tree, which we got to see. And as close to the oak tree as she possibly could, she dug 3 holes. And she put 3 jars into those holes. And when she took a child from the ghetto, she wrote down on a little scrap of paper the child's name, the name of the parents, and where she found them exactly in the ghetto and what they were doing. She put the scraps of paper, 2,500, into these 3 jars. Why? Because at the end of the war, what she hoped to do was to go back, find the children, And she wanted to tell them, not to disrupt their lives. She thought she owed it to them to say, you're not a Catholic. Your name isn't George, it's David. You're Jewish. These really aren't your parents. Here's all I know about your parents. And that was really important to her, to try to help the kids really understand their heritage, their culture, and so forth. She was able to find 81 of the 2,500. The rest had scattered and so forth. Some were, she found out, killed by the Germans. They were found out in the farms and in the convents and so forth. But she only found 81 of them. One of the things, I'll skip ahead a moment, when I got to go visit her, the second day I was there, she was awarded the third most prestigious Medal of Honor that the Polish government can give to a non-military person. And during the ceremony, I didn't know this, she had 3 caretakers, all 3 she had saved from the ghetto, by the way. They had arranged and found another 20 survivors, 20 people that she had survived, that she was able to sneak out of the ghetto. And obviously they owed their lives to her, and they had never met her. So these 20 people came into the room. Irina didn't cry, but all 20 of them were hysterical. They finally got to meet the woman that saved their lives. So that was really an amazing, touching moment. Irina was honored by Yad Vashem in, I think, 1964 as one of the righteous Gentiles. But what happened after that, and why nobody ever heard of her, is because Poland was a communist country. The last thing they wanted to do was to brag about someone who saved Jews. So there was no publicity ever. Nobody in Poland had a clue who this woman was. This is a sad part of the story. When we went there to see her, we sent the children and the aunts, uncles, grandparents, whatever. And when they were there, she said, I want to meet the professor, which is what she calls the teacher, which is me. So the next summer I went back with the teacher and I think 2 of the girls. And that's when I got to meet Irina. Probably the most moving experience of my life. When I looked into her eyes, I saw the darkest pupils I'd ever seen in my life. And I kept thinking, like, there's this movie camera shooting, going around and around of all the horrible things that she saw. Well, when I was there and the girls were there, we got to meet her daughter. We also got to meet her daughter-in-law and her granddaughter. Let me tell you a little bit about the meeting with the daughter. We were really excited to meet the daughter, and we thought we'd hear some incredible plaudits about Irina, what a wonderful woman and mother and all that. And her daughter said she was the worst mother you could imagine, which shocked all of us. And she said, here's why. Every Monday in school, there was teacher-parent conference day, every Monday. My mother never, ever showed up. She said she never gave us any attention because she was out saving all these Jewish kids. You know, you can't do everything, I guess. So she really resented her mother for that. And she still saw her and all, but there was obviously a schism there that was vast. We then had a worse meeting with the granddaughter and the daughter-in-law. Irina, and this is amazing, Irina was married to a guy named Sendler. They got divorced. She ended up marrying one of the men she saved from the ghetto. I told you she saved some adults, not very many. So she married somebody else, Jewish guy. And he then passed away. And after that, she remarried Sendler, and that's why her name came back to be Sendler. So we met. The Irina's had a daughter and a son. The son died at age 42, and it just broke her heart. And she went to live with her daughter-in-law and granddaughter. The daughter-in-law always resented Irina for whatever reasons, I guess maybe just for even moving in. And it was interesting because I'm with kids the same age of the granddaughter. And the kids from Uniontown started asking her questions. The first question was, wow, what do you think of your grandmother? And she said, what do you mean? And they said, well, I mean, look, she saved all these kids. I mean, she's incredible. What do you tell your friends? The granddaughter said, nothing. Well, don't you think this is like really a cool thing that she did? Aren't you proud of her? I don't see why I should be. It was such a downer for all of us. We couldn't believe it. It was so sad to see this woman who's done so much for so many treated so poorly by her relatives. Her daughter wasn't close to her. Her daughter-in-law really didn't like her. The granddaughter could have cared less. And that was really sad. One of the things that happened when we met with the daughter, the daughter sent us to the friend's house that Irina went to every Sunday to put the little pieces of paper in. And she had passed away, but it was her daughter, the daughter of the friend, met with us. And she said, yeah, Irina would come over every Sunday, and I was told, don't go in the backyard. And I never did. I never knew what she was doing. And I found out later what she was doing was putting these strips of paper into these jars. And she turned around, and in this cabinet, she opened it up and said, oh, here's one of the jars. And our mouths just dropped. You have one of the jars? Oh my God. And she gave it to the girls. Now the girls, being 13, 14 years old, did what could have happened. They left it in the hotel room. So we're at the airport about to get on the plane. I said, where's the jar? Uh-oh, I think I left it on the TV. We had some people with us that took us and all that, and they got in their car and they had to go amazingly fast. Went back to the hotel, came back. The plane they held for us, back in those days they did, now they wouldn't. And so they got the jar. So they do have one of the jars. The girls became celebrities. They were on the Today Show. They were on CNN. I mean, I could go through it all. They were in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. They have done this play all over the country. Now, those girls, original girls, have all grown up. A couple of them are married, have children and so forth. But that high school now has taken that course, that concept, and instilled it in seniors every year. And they take a course on what they did, what the girls did, why they should care about things like this. Persistence, even though your teacher said don't do it, they were persistent and they went and they did it. Some other things that were important, I think, I told you that Irina, 2 ways of getting the kids out were in a toolbox for little kids and underneath, the seats. She dressed kids sometimes in really nice clothes so that they looked like Polish kids and so forth. She would sneak them through in different ways, but when they got on the other side, she would dress them so that a Polish citizen looking at them walking and so forth wouldn't think anything was suspicious. She thought of absolutely everything. And she had, I don't want you to get the wrong impression, she had 9 or 10 other social workers that she trained. She did not do 2,500 by herself, but she did 1/10 of that, 250 or more herself. And again, no one ever got caught except her, and only because that lady was suspicious and turned her in. I wrote a paper on this. I want to just look at it quickly, make sure I didn't miss anything that was crucial. And I think I didn't. That's about it. That's what I wrote. So now it's funny. I went to the Holocaust Museum years ago and they had a display and Irina was actually on the display. Only about 30% of the facts were incorrect. So I called the Holocaust Museum back up and I said, I know for a fact that you have some mistakes. So they did correct them. And if you go to the Holocaust Museum, there is an area about heroes and things like that. And you'll see Irina Sendler and her story. So she also, which is remarkable, from nobody knowing who she was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. And she lost to Al Gore that year. So these girls from Uniontown, Kansas, population 300, high school, the whole high school, 150, saved this woman's everything. And Irina, and I'll read you a letter that she wrote me because it's so important. But you're going to see in the letter, she says something that's crucial. She said, I'm not a hero. My father taught me that if I was walking past a pond and I saw someone drowning and I couldn't swim, to still jump in. She said, I'm not a hero. We had a dinner in Kansas City, where I'm from, and 900 people showed up to honor Irina. She couldn't come because of her health and age and all that. But we were able to record 4 questions I was able to ask her, and then recorded and translated and so forth. But 900 people paid $150 each. And what we did do is we brought over, remember I told you she had a toolbox and a 6-week-old baby was in there? Well, that 6-week-old baby at the time of the dinner was 71 years old. And she came, she brought her daughter, who brought one of her 4 children. And as they stood up on the stage, you could realize that Irina didn't save 2,500 people. She probably saved 25 million, who knows how many, generation after generation after generation. That was extremely moving. When we met with her, she was not only humble, she was brilliant. First of all, she planned our 5-day visit, every minute of it. She did it at 92 years old at that point. And she had her 3 people that were helping her take us to all these particular places. She took us to a couple of concentration camps she wanted us to see that I had never seen. And she had everything to the minute planned. But what was interesting is we went all this way to see Irina, and she would see us for exactly 15 minutes every day. And when 15 minutes were up, she said, okay, let's go. And that's how she was, precision. And that's why she was able to pull this off with these 2,500 kids. That's the most remarkable woman that I've ever met. She really believed, let me go back to the dinner. This is important too. I was able to ask her 4 questions, as I told you. And the last question I asked her, I said, you didn't want your story told. You decided to let the world know about it because you were so impressed with these Catholic girls in this little town in Kansas. Well, now that your story is out, what's the moral to the story? What do you want people to remember? What's the takeaway from all of this? And she didn't hesitate. She said, I want the next time you pick up a dictionary, the word hero is not in it. And you could have heard a pin drop on 900 people as we digested what she said. And of course, what she said is, if everyone does what they're supposed to do, they're not labeled a hero, are they? There is no such thing as a hero. It's just normal behavior. So let me read you the letter she sent, and I think you'll get a really good sense of where she was coming from and her relationship as it evolved with these girls, from not answering any of their letters, to the kind of feelings that she had. And remember, she's 92, she had one of the difficult lives of anybody I've ever met, well, probably the most difficult life, risked her life every single day. And here's what she felt. My most dear Professor Shuchart, I'm writing this letter with enormous emotion. I can't find adequate proper words to thank you for making it possible for my girls, their history teacher, and their family members to come to Poland to me. The sum of money you had given them as a present to make their dreams come true is huge even in American conditions. And yet a part of money, your immense gift of heart is of a unique dimension. It's a kind of fairy tale, a legend. In fact, like all this story of the girls taking an interest in the Holocaust. Born in a small village in Kansas, they are doing a big job on an international scale. They're taking up a problem, so difficult to understand as the Holocaust, especially because its perpetrator was Germany, a country of great Wagner and Goethe. Proves their maturity that seldom happens in such a young age, their wisdom, sensitivity, and spiritual values. In the middle of all this, me, just an ordinary human being, and then she emphasizes, not a hero at all. Because a hero is only he or she who does extraordinary things, and I was doing only ordinary ones. They were the result of my upbringing. My father was a doctor of great professional knowledge, very dedicated to community service. My mother accompanied him in rendering assistance to all the needy. We lived in Atvak, a small health resort for people with lung problems. We lived in poverty because my dad not only treated people mostly for free, but often gave them money for necessary medicines. Many of his patients were of Jewish origin, not able to pay other doctors for an appointment. I grew up among Jewish children. When I was 4 or 5, I could speak Yiddish fairly well. The atmosphere in our home differed very much from that of others. And that's why I left my home with 2 maxims in mind. 1, remember there are only good and bad people. Neither race, nor religion, nor nationality is of any significance. And 2, Remember also that when anybody is drowning, you should hold out your hand to him, regardless of whether or not you can swim. So when on the 1st of September, 1939, the Germans invaded Poland and all the country was drowning, and the first to drown were Jewish people, and among them children, those completely defenseless creatures, holding out a hand to them was a must, helping them not to drown. If I had been all by myself, I would have done nothing. I place all the emphasis on this. I had 10 permanent liaison women and a team of brave, noble people who helped me out of the need of their hearts. The times were so cruel that saving one person of Jewish origin involved at least 10 people. Remember, the Talmud says, save a person, you save the world. She saved 2,500 worlds. So the need of our hearts confronted Hitler just like that. Dear Professor, in closing my letter, I'd like to express my immense gratitude. Thanks to you, I experienced 5 unforgettable days of the visit of my 10 American friends and guests. And in my very sad and hard life, I am already 92. I am bothered by 30 serious illnesses, and 18 months ago, my son had passed away into the unknown. The arrival of the girls, thanks to you, was a medicine, a balm, a solace for my woeful soul. And let this quiet, beautiful music tell the rest of my feelings I have for you, Irina Sendlerova. This is my most prized possession, okay? I was blown away, to say the least. The girls, as I told you, ended up being famous. They've been on all these TV shows and all these newspapers and all of this stuff, and never once did they lose their humility. They never understood why everybody was so excited about them. Here's a great example of what happened. The teacher told me when we sent them to Poland on the airplane, as it was taxiing to the gate in Warsaw, one of the girls looked out and there was a throng of newspaper reporters. And she said, oh my God, there must be a movie star on this flight. And the teacher turned to her and said, I think you're the star. And let me tell you why. Remember I told you that the communist government hid this. They didn't want anything to do with it. About 3 months before this story broke, another story broke. There was a town in Poland, I'm going to mispronounce it. It was Wannsee or something like that. And here's what they uncovered. 10,000 Jews in that town were murdered by Polish people, not German people, not Ukrainians who were terrible during the war, Polish people, Polish citizens. So when the Polish government got hold of this story, they said, wait a minute, we can balance this terrible, terrible publicity that we're getting with this wonderful story. And we can show where non-Jewish kids saved this woman's story, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how she ended up getting that medal, that third highest medal, is because the government finally flipped, but for their own selfish needs. When the girls were there, they told me they were followed day and night by the press. And they were asked to give their play in front of the Unknown Soldiers Monument in Warsaw. And they were on television, every night, all of that. And it was a huge, huge deal for everyone. When we went back, we didn't have that kind of audience. No one knew we were coming, but that was just as well. The 3 women that took us around, we saw things that no one else could have seen. We saw exactly where she took kids after they went through the gate, and that we got to see a convent where she took them. And we did get to meet, believe it or not, one of the farmer's family. He had passed away, but I think it was his son now had the farm. And the son knew all about it because he grew up with the person that Irina saved. And that was really a touching thing too. So that's the story of, Irina Sendler. She's my hero, although she doesn't want to ever be, I just lost it. She never wants to be a hero. She hopes that the word is stricken from the dictionary. And probably the most remarkable person any one of us could ever possibly hope to meet. She makes Schindler look like he didn't do anything, and he did. Afterwards, by the way, at the dinner, I was approached and asked if they could do a book and a movie. And this was Miramax back then, and Harvey Weinstein and all those guys. And what they used to do is they used to do a book, and if the book sold well, then they'd make a movie out of it. So they wrote a contract. I got Irina $100,000 which she didn't want a penny of. She said, and this is amazing, she said, I'll put it in a trust for my granddaughter. I went, I wouldn't give the granddaughter the time of day, but that's the way she was. And the girls each got $75,000, which helped pay for their colleges. And the teacher got $50,000, I think. And Miramax had 2 years to write the book in the contract and 3 years to do the movie. Well, 2 or 3 weeks before the 2 years were up, we still didn't have a book. So I called them pretty upset and irate, even though the money was paid already. That wasn't the issue. And that was when turmoil started with Miramax. We didn't even know why, and that didn't come out for years, but they were having issues and they apologized profusely. They're never going to get the book done, et cetera, et cetera. So I immediately in Kansas City, that Hallmark Cards is home office in Kansas City. And I don't know if you've ever seen any of the Hallmark Cards presentations. I think they even have they used to have a channel, maybe they still do. So I talked to them and they were very interested in doing a movie for television. And we said, great. And they said, we want to pay you. And we wrote Irina and she said, no more money to anybody. We've been overpaid already. We're not doing this for money. She said, the girls even have enough, no more money. So free of charge, we met with them for hours and hours and hours, gave them the whole story, and you can get the movie. It's called Life in a Jar. And then a friend of mine wrote a book called Life in a Jar. You can get that probably in the library or Amazon or someplace, if you're interested. The movie is excellent. It's 95% accurate, which is incredible for Hollywood. The acting was great. I can't remember the name of the lady that was the head actress for Irina, but it was wonderful. So those are something you can do if you choose to either get the book or see the movie. Okay, any questions? Okay, that boy must have done a great job. Terrific.
It's because we can't unmute. We can't unmute. If you raise your hand first, that is like an incredible story. And I want you all to understand this is one part of Johnny Shuchart. He is a philanthropist and a generous guy and has his own personal story. We could bring him back and then he would talk about kids' letters to terrorists. We could bring him back again. He could talk about his book, which is entitled, You Are Not the Brightest of My Four Sons, and Other Things That My Father Said to Me. That's a whole other thing. I think I got the title a little wrong, but it was like that.
You're pretty close.
So I just want you to understand, this guy is a Renaissance man and is so interesting, but this particular story is amazing. So Melissa, will you allow people to unmute? So if there are any questions, we can also address that. Oh, Bob's clapping.
Let me interrupt. The way I view all of this is I was in the right place at the right time. I think almost every one of you that was in that situation, and if you were able to raise funds and so forth, you would have done the exact same thing. These girls had to go meet Irina. Irina had to be able to meet these girls. And at the rate they were saving money, of course, it never would happen. Irina did die, by the way, at age 98. Girls would still be raising money probably to get enough to go to Poland. So again, I didn't do any, I'm going to be like her. I'm not a hero. I did what I think almost anybody would do in the same situation. I do want to spend a second. The other things that are so important that I'm doing, I'd love to come back, is I have a foundation called the Shuchart Foundation for Mental Health Awareness. I don't know about you, and I'm sure you are. I am so disturbed, especially with the suicides among young people and all people. Suicides now are the #1 cause of death outside of natural causes for people over 85. The suicide rate for elders has gone through the roof. For kids, it's now the first or second, depending on who you ask, cause of death. So one of the things I do is I travel the country before COVID and I talk to groups, 1,500 people down to 30 people, it doesn't matter, about mental health. For people like you and people, parents and so forth, I try to help you understand what to look for in your grandchildren or even your children, if you see certain things. And then more importantly, what do you do about it? One of the biggest problems kids have is they may see a friend who's suffering all of a sudden, but they don't want to rat on them. They don't want to go tell an adult about it. They're afraid they're going to get in trouble with their friend. So one of the first things I do is I make sure in a school that we have an assembly with the whole school. And I tell the kids, look, don't be afraid of turning in your friend who says he's going to kill himself. Everybody in this room now knows you're going to do that. So if anybody here is going to tell somebody they're going to kill themselves, expect your friend to get help for you. And that changes the whole dynamic. So now everybody knows it's on the table and so forth. But kids need to know, all of us need to know what to look for, what to feel if you're feeling something strange. That's really crucial. So I'm on a crusade to end the stigma associated with mental health. And it's the stigma that keeps people from getting help. I've met parents who honestly have said, I really don't want to tell my neighbors and friends that I have a kid with a mental illness because it's embarrassing. It's shameful. It's the stigma. So guess what happens? They don't get the kid any help. Next thing you know, in Kansas City, we had 2 girls stand in front of a train. So the suicide rate has just gone through the roof. And I'd love to come back sometime and talk more about that because it's so important for all of us and for you and your grandchildren, your children, things you can do, without butting in, but there's things that you need to do. Every time someone commits suicide, everybody says, boy, I should have known. Oh man, I should have done this. Well, maybe. I don't think so. I happen to think there's not much you can do if it's gone to a certain point and you haven't done anything about it. You got to intercede quickly. We used to think if somebody said, I'm going to kill myself, it meant they wouldn't. It's just the opposite. Statistics are exactly the opposite. More people that say they're going to do it. More boys kill themselves than girls. More girls try it. But boys use guns. Girls try other things that don't work. So if you have a granddaughter, a grandson, and so forth, it's scary times. They're going through a lot. Okay.
This just shows Johnny's commitment. I mean, he made his money. He's giving back in a multitude of ways. Did I see a question? Was there somebody that had a question from the group? Steve, I thought you were. Yes,
So I wanted to be a little bit selfish. And
you're the president of the board. Go right ahead.
well, my selfish request or thought is to get the movie Life in a Jar, invite you back, but present it live at Ingleside when things allow that to happen. And then use that as a platform for maybe a mini series or 2 or 3 Zooms like these for you to tell the rest of the story.
I'd love to. It'd be great.
Yeah.
I think it's a super idea. And I think when people see that movie, they're going to really get interested and want to know a little bit more about how this happened and why and all of that.
I've never heard Johnny say no. He's that much of a.
No, I'd be happy to do it. It'd be
I
great.
can't believe how fast the clock went by.
I know, right?
Yeah, I mean, you are totally engrossing as a speaker.
Thank you.
And the message is just so important and worthwhile. So
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty
so
easy.
much.
It's pretty easy to speak about Irina, though. In all fairness, she is. I've said it, the most remarkable human being I've ever met. Not just for what she did, but her approach to it and how she viewed it as not being a hero. And again, if you can't even swim, to jump in, she meant that. Really did mean that. And she really did want all of us to live our lives the same way. She really did want the word hero stricken from the dictionary. She was dead serious about that. So my crusade for her is to just tell that to everybody. We need to get the word hero out of the dictionary, and we all need to start acting like heroes, if you will. But thank you so much for allowing me to talk to you. It's one of my favorite subjects, of course. I'd love to come back, talk about anything that you want that I know anything about. And Joan, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Johnny. I'm buying dinner tomorrow night.
You can send the honorarium to my home address, the $3,000.
I'm buying you dinner tomorrow night. That's the best I can do.
Oh man, it's going to be a big dinner.
Okay, fine. You can get a Coke with it.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you guys.
For everybody attending this series this season, and stay tuned for next season. Thank you for the applause that is silent. And everybody have a great evening.
Thanks again. Stay safe, everybody. Take care of yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.